A local immigration case that's getting national attention. A teenager from Ossining set to get deported possibly as early as this week. The fight to keep him here running out of time. We're going to speak to the attorney who's representing Diego Puma. Also, protests in Seattle after police shoot and kill a pregnant woman while responding to a burglary call. Now fingers are pointing and people are looking for elusive answers. Now, Bill Cosby and his legal team doing a victory lap after the mistrial. Is that premature, and could that actually hurt him if and when this case is tried again? That and much more to cover in the next 60 minutes. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Now, those are supporters of Diego Puma, the Ossining teenager who is now in federal custody in Louisiana, awaiting deportation. And that could come as early as the end of the week. Protesters, they've rallied throughout the area supporting his cause. Congresswoman Nita Lowey, she is also a proponent of him staying in the country. Here's the New York Democrat who represents parts of Westchester as well as Rockland counties.
He came here for an education. He's about to graduate, and I'm asking the department, those who are responsible for the law, to give him a reprieve so he can graduate, and then his case could be discussed.
Diego and his mother, they came into the U.S. illegally in 2014. They were arrested at the border but freed pending their asylum case, which was denied. They were picked up by the feds a couple of weeks ago, and they've been in custody ever since. They say they were fleeing gang violence in their home nation of Ecuador, but immigration officials suspected that he, in fact, was a gang member. But the Ecuadorian government says that is not the case. Here's part of the statement from the consulate, and I'm going to read it verbatim. Quote, "We have reviewed our government records and have confirmed that he has no criminal record in Ecuador. Additionally, based on our evidence, he is not now nor ever has been affiliated to any gang in Ecuador," end quote. Meantime, Diego missed his high school graduation and he's sitting and waiting in Louisiana. So is his mother, albeit at different detention facilities. And joining us now is Karin Anderson, her group called the Neighbors Link Community Law Practice. They're representing Diego. Good seeing you as always. Fascinating case here. But just let's give the latest, because as of now, it doesn't look like he will be deported Friday. It doesn't mean that he'll be released, but it doesn't look like at the end of the week there'll be any resolution to this.
It's hard to say. The government has a lot of authority to act one way or another. So we really don't know what's going to happen. We filed a second request for a stay of deportation after the first one was denied, and we're waiting for the answer at this time.
I mentioned off the top there's conflicting reports as to his prior life, this young man's in Ecuador. But you say not only wasn't he affiliated with a gang, but in fact he came to this country fleeing gang violence.
Exactly. He and his mother came to this country seeking the protection of the United States against gang violence that they were experiencing in Ecuador. And it gets to the complexity of the law that somebody who comes to this country seeking this type of protection
asylum,
asylum, which is a remedy where you ask the government to allow you to remain here permanently because you fear for your safety back home, that the law is so complex that a person can in fact be found to have committed the wrong that was actually done against him. Here's a kid who was fleeing gang violence, and now he's being accused of being in a gang.
Well, we saw his high school classmates rallying, the community, lawmakers, both Congresswoman Lowey, both U.S. senators representing New York as well. But then there's certainly the pushback. And what's interesting here is I know a lot of people at home say, oh, well, this had everything to do with November and the recent election. Yes and no. You can argue from a climate standpoint, but really this is ICE, and the authority that ICE has is a lot more broad than I think a lot of the public, or at least I even imagine.
Well, I think that's a great point. I think it's important for people to realize that there were specific ICE policies, even under the prior administration, that prioritized the cases of individuals who came to the United States after January 1st, 2014. There was a surge of people from predominantly Central American countries, but others, like my client and his mother, seeking the protection of this country against gang violence and other sorts of oppression. And those cases were fast-tracked. So this case, it's unique because every human life is unique, but there could be more of them going forward. This government has broad authority to enforce this.
So, you know, people are sitting at home tonight, Karin, saying, hey, wait a minute. Kid didn't get to the back of the line, him and mom. It wasn't like he was a 2-year-old where he was brought here against his knowledge or whatever else. If we let everybody cross the border that wants to leave whatever Latin or Central American country in question here, where would we be as a country? What is the response to that?
Well, my response to that is that the United States has a commitment under both our domestic and international law to protect people who are fleeing persecution and to exercise its power over immigration in humanitarian ways. The government has enormous power to protect individuals, to regulate our borders, and to enforce law. That power comes with a responsibility to enforce law in a humane way. And just to clarify, there's a big difference between people who are waiting online to apply for an immigration benefit and people who flee to this country because they're afraid for their lives. A line shouldn't be a death sentence.
People may know the kid's name, they may know his picture. We talked about people rallying, but as a person, as a kid, him and his mom, describe him.
Really nice people. You know, I've met with Diego 3 times at this point, 2 in person and 1 by video phone. He's a really nice kid, really polite, really respectful, and just remarkably, in my experience, courteous and grounded for somebody who's in the position he's in. You know, he went from being in high school to being in an orange jumpsuit in a detention center overnight. And that's an extraordinary situation for any person, let alone a high school student.
You obviously do this as a passion, as a living, but it's really complicated right now. Yeah. How our immigration policies, I mean, every night I'm reporting about different cities who are sanctuary cities who voted against it. Then you have obviously the positions that this administration's taken, and then the court's trying to figure out, you know, if he can bar entry from certain nations. That's not at play here, but my point is there seems to be so many moving targets as to who can and can't come in this country. When they do, what then happens to them? Is there rule of law in terms of is there due process in terms of who gets their cases heard? Does it matter if you're a dreamer? Does it matter if you're not? I mean, it's hard to keep up with.
It is hard to keep up with, but I think Diego's case is a great example of something that's really black and white, which is that he has made a direct request to the ICE Enforcement and Removal Operations section of the Department of Homeland Security. He's made a direct request to the federal government for discretion that he be treated humanely so he can stay for another year to finish high school. The government's power cuts both ways. It has a power and an authority to enforce the law, but it also has broad authority to be humane, especially to young people who sought the protection of this country. So there's a lot, we shouldn't be distracted by the complexities, I guess what I'm saying. There's a lot of complexity of law, but if you look in that kid's face in a detention center, some things become really clear.
So will ICE, for example, in this case, will they look at the kid's face? Will they look at his personal story and say, he isn't a threat to the country, there was real persecution where he came from, the kid, you know, fled to basically be alive, or will he be a number? How does it work?
Well, I mean, I guess that gets to the heart of the matter. We're hoping that he will be a face, and that the federal government will see the complexity and the humanity of the situation and of this person. But we have to wait and see.
Mother and son were reunited in Orange County. They got separated. They're now in Louisiana, 2 different facilities.
That's right.
A, do they get reunited again? And B, do you have any sense when you're going to know whether or not this kid's going to be able to stay in this country or be sent back to Ecuador?
I don't have any sense when we will find out. My understanding, based on the law, is that it should be soon, because he and his mother are both have final orders of removal. And like I said, they are considered priority cases because they came to the United States seeking the protection of our government in the past couple years as part of what's called the surge of immigrants that came in over the past couple of years because of the increased levels of violence and persecution. So we'll see what will happen.
What happens to him if he gets sent back to Ecuador?
Well, what happens if he gets sent back to Ecuador is that he and his mother will be put on a chartered plane to go back, and they'll land in Ecuador and be left with, very little resources, including, I might add, maybe not even shoes on their feet. Because when people are picked up, they can be picked up in any circumstance. Both Diego and his mother were picked up at homes, at private homes. In order for them to have clothes to be deported in, they need to get, typically a family will have an opportunity to drop a bag off 20 pounds of luggage. Like, this seems so minute, what's the big deal? But just think about this as the humanity of this. You have people who not only are facing deportation, but we're not even sure if they have enough clothes. Their parents didn't, Diego's father and the family didn't have an opportunity to even give luggage to ICE, so that they could be, if they are removed to this country with really nothing and no resources, that at least they'd have maybe a change of clothes. We don't even know if they'll have that opportunity, depending on how fast this goes.
Well, we'll continue to follow the case here. Fascinating. And Karin, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you.
All right, coming up next, everyone, more high-profile fatal shootings involving police, each one controversial. We'll look at whether the reaction to these incidents has changed, and if so, we'll ask our panel why.